And we're just glad. We're just so, I mean, look outside. Closer. We're just so excited to be here. You look outside. I had the pleasure of eating lunch with my good friend, past Representative Brett Harrell, out on the deck. It was beautiful here in St. Simons today, and we just appreciate being here. I'm Rick Jaspers. I'm the co-chairman. My friend Frank Ginn, and I'm from Jasper, 300 and something miles from here. But I'm glad to be here because my wife drove last night, and she's sitting on front of the beach right now, so she's very happy. We made a good trade. But the leaves are starting to turn up in North Georgia. The apples are in if you're looking for somewhere to go. But we're just glad to be here and thrilled to see it, the group of people who are here. Real quick, I also want to recognize a few folks. You know, Chairman Ginn, like I said, Brett Harrell, our past Ways and Means chairman. Wave your hand, Brett. He lives here, lucky rascal. And also past Representative Jeff Jones. Let's see there. Now, we're very thrilled to have the two representatives who they both claim this airport. Where's Don Hogan at? Right there, Representative Hogan and Buddy DeLoach, side by side. You know, we appreciate them. Thank you. I got more to say later. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that I'm not going to let the House outdo us. I've got the most energetic senator in the world, said right here, and I'd like Sheila McNeil to stand up, and let's give her a round of applause because she is truly in her district. She thinks all these planes are really airboats. You know, she's into boats somehow or another. All that experience in with the Navy side of things. But great to have you here, Sheila. Said thank you for coming over and welcoming us to your district. I'm Frank Ginn. I'm the co-chair along with my good friend Rick. One of the things that, you know, we heard a little bit in our first meeting about some of the need that we see in airports and kind of what's going on. And this is a great opportunity because we've got so many people from all over the state that are running airports. And we really want to hear from y'all. And we've got a great list of speakers here today. I'm not going to belabor the point, but for me, we want to find out how we can better fund our infrastructure and airports and what we can do to help grow Georgia's economy and grow jobs in Georgia. And that's what this whole committee is about, and that's what we intend to do.
You know, just to add on, we'll have our members introduce themselves in a second, but I've been the chairman for a year, or now this is my first year, and in aviation for me, I had a small airport in Jasper. They seemed to fight a lot, but now they're all on the same page over the years, and that's all I knew. And thanks to the last few months, I personally learned a lot, Chairman, about aviation, what it can mean, what it does for economic development. And I knew that, but across the state of Georgia, one thing I'll tell you, there's a lot going on also. Chairman David Knight is one of our appropriations subcommittee chairmen, and looking at it maybe from a different aspect. He's looking at the education component, whether it be, on the technical training or the college training that we have for aviation workers. He's been doing a very deep dive into that, which I know would be good news to all of y'all who are in the aviation business, because it's something we know there's a shortage of all of those workers. So Chairman Knight's really working on that. We hope to have, he's going to come speak later on what he's found out to do that. This is an exciting business. I found out there's just a lot going on, a lot of excitement that goes around about it. Now when I go to a meeting, people want to talk about aviation because they know that we're interested in it. And we look forward to seeing, just like Chairman Ginn said, to help if we can, learn more about the issues. Chairman Ginn and I, we were talking about this at the very beginning. If you look across the people who are going to speak today, we're looking at issues. Just like we do in the Rural Development Council, we want to know what your issue is, and do you have a solution? And you may not want to say it on a microphone, And I hope you'll come to Chairman Ginn or I or one of the other members of this committee and just say, this is our real problem. We need you to help us do this. That's what we need. A lot of this will be people bragging on what they've done, and that's great. But we need to look at those critical issues, and if you'll be so kind and helpful to share it with Chairman Ginn and I, it will really help us a lot. But that's enough for me. I'd like Chairman Ginn to start down on the end there with Senator Tyler. Just tell us who you are and about why you're interested in aviation and all that good stuff.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tyler Harper, serve in the State Senate, represent the 7th Senate District in the Georgia General Assembly. But I guess more importantly, my interest is I'm a pilot.
Both types.
That's right. And actually flew in here today and have used this airport quite a bit, among others across the state, and understand the importance of the airport infrastructure, and appreciate the work of the committee and look forward to the meeting today and the presentation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'd also throw out this is Chairman Harper's bill that got this started. We need to recognize you for that. We appreciate the focus on aviation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Senator Sonia Halpern. I represent District 39, which is in Fulton County. I've got Atlanta. Atlanta's the biggest city. East Point, College Park, City of South Fulton, and Union City. And of course, in Atlanta, we've got Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I'm really excited to be on this committee. As all of you who are already here know, airports and the infrastructure and the workforce, the economic driver that aviation represents for this state is just something that we cannot ignore. And really, I'm really excited that we're highlighting, and with your help, we'll be able to better understand what the needs are and figure out ways that we can successfully address them.
Good afternoon. My name is Senator Clint Dixon. I represent the 45th District, which is the northern third of Gwinnett County. And, we've got tremendous interest in aviation and airports, across the state. We've got a great airfield in Gwinnett County, Briscoe Field. It's definitely an economic driver for us in Gwinnett. There's been a few attempts to privatize it and make it larger where commercial flights could come in. Both of those attempts did fail, but very interested to hear from the speakers today, and looking forward to serving on this committee. Thank you.
One of the things I want to tell y'all about Clint, he got a little high earlier today. Said he was up on the top of the Talmadge Bridge in beautiful Savannah, had the best vantage point. Said we did a little DOT work, said on the other side, on the bridge side. So.
Good afternoon. My name is John LaHood. I represent the 175th House District in Georgia. That's Valdosta and then over west towards Thomasville. It's great to see all of you here, see a lot of familiar faces, specifically my airport manager for Valdosta Regional, Jim Galloway. Thanks for being here, Jim. And it's great to see this airport thriving. I actually flew in today too, and I think I was number 4 coming in, and there were several waiting to depart at the same time. So it's good to see the airport, the aviation community thriving here, and look forward to doing all we can to keep it going. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Representative Philip Singleton from Coweta County, District 71. I've been flying almost my whole life here, so I did military, commercial, and general aviation. So, and unironically, I think I'm one of the only guys that drove here today.
I drove.
You drove? All right, me and the chairman, so I'm in good company. But obviously, this
My wife drove, excuse me.
She drove. Well, he got here much safer than I did because I drove. But obviously, this is extremely important to us. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to be on the Transportation Committee to begin with, and then I'm very passionate about this. So infrastructure, making sure we put the right stuff in the right place is just really important. And you cannot underemphasize. Aviation is about 10% of the U.S. economy is based on aviation or in and around it. So it's extremely important. So just happy to be here.
And I'd like to just also, Representative Singleton, you mentioned a little bit about your military service. We appreciate it and all that you did, for sure. Ready? First off, we have Ron Burr. You know, we look forward to hearing from you, Ron, Rob, excuse me. You'd fix me.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. First of all, we want to welcome everybody here. We're very glad to have you at this part of Georgia. I want to say a couple of people also. Larry Wade, this is his facility. And Larry, thank you for being a great host and setting everything up for us. And that's his airplane over there. So he's very active with the pilot. He runs Golden Isles Aviation. Thank you, Larry. You want to stand up for a minute?
This way, yeah.
What I would like to do is just give you a little brief overview of the area and also talk about, we also starting off our Georgia Airport Association annual conference. It kicks off tomorrow. A lot of you people are attending, so we welcome you to stay around. Have you registered? Hope you have. If you haven't, please, we still have on-site registration. So Georgia Airports Association represents all of the airports in Georgia. And we're very much in favor of this initiative. Actually, we were the ones that kind of needled Senator Harper to make it happen. So thank you, Senator, very much. I appreciate it very much. A little bit about the area. Removing the slide. We actually have 3 airports in this county. This is Glenn County. I think that's very unique for Georgia, but it basically tells you, I always say this is a hotbed for aviation. And of course, you're going to hear some other speakers of how important aviation is of our transportation mode in this area after I give my presentation. We have Brunswick Golden Isles Airport, which is by the way you fly about 5-7 miles away from here. We also have St. Simons Island Airport, which we're right here, but also we have Jekyll Island. It's a state-run airport, and we consider this, I call it a mini airport system, as well as we're part of the state airport system. Of course, airports are only good for where you fly from one point to another. So really emphasize the system word in our discussion. Airports are a transportation mode, and so when we talk about one airport, we're really talking about getting to another airport. So that's very important to us. A little more in-depth into our airports. At our major, I call our Brunswick Airport more of our industrial airport. It has a longer runway, a little more land available. So we're able to cater to a different type of businesses that are basically use larger airplanes, which is very unique that we could cater to have 8,000-foot runway and additional land for additional development. And actually our agency, the Glenn County Airport Commission, reports to the Development Authority recognizing the importance of airports in economic development. So that's how we're set up here. 4 major business lines we have at Brunswick Golden Isles Airport, of course, is the Gulfstream, which everyone knows Gulfstream in Savannah, but they have a very sizable operation here, and you'll hear from one of the speakers from Gulfstream today. Stonebolt Aviation is a very unique operation, servicing large airplanes, basically Boeing type airplanes typically, and that we have airplanes literally from all over the world that fly into that airport, our airport for maintenance and services. Every airport has a fixed space operator, and I think most aviators knows what that means. Manning Aviation is a family-run operation. I always say this area is really a small town atmosphere. Everybody knows somebody. You can't go any place without meeting somebody. It's really great to have that hometown feeling here at Manning Aviation and also Golden Isles Aviation. And, of course, Delta Airlines. I always say that Brunswick Golden Isles Airport, we're really an extension of Hartsfield, really another concourse, I keep on saying. It's only a 37-minute flight, and we have several airports in the state of Georgia that have that same connection, from here into Hartsfield and then around the world. It's very important to our business line. We're very fortunate to have that kind of operation here because that's the kind of demographics we have that could use that service. So it's extremely important that we have that connection of air carrier service. But let's talk a little. Let's talk a little about St. Simons Airport, which Island Airport, which you're here right now. As I mentioned, Golden Isles Aviation is our fixed base operator here. Again, locally owned, locally operated. The type of service is second to none as far as hospitality goes. And I always say we have a destination airport here. We basically have what, 1 or 2 jets based here, but 86% of our traffic is actually jet traffic. People are coming from someplace else, landing here, and spending their money here, doing the economics here. That's why they're using the means of transportation into this airport. We have some also maintenance operations here, and of course, a lot of based airplanes for people who have homes here and second homes and so forth. A little bit about our needs. The state just did our responsibility is mostly infrastructure and economic development. The state, as I think you're familiar with, has just done a study for all airports in the state of Georgia the conditions of the field. And unfortunately, this field has a lot of needs. This airport goes back to 1938. One time the military operated for a while. This is a chart that's showing the condition of certain pavements around the airfield. And unless you're bright green, you need some major maintenance. We have initially to meet design standards for the airplanes that currently use this airport, where our plan is to go to an EMAS system on our longest runway to keep that runway within standards of the FAA standards. Very expensive project. Carol could talk about it, Steve could talk about it. We're talking about $10 million worth of work to meet design standards. Plus the runway itself. Actually, we did some Band-Aid work just recently, but within the next 5 years, we basically have to redo that runway. Those are needs that we're talking about investment in this airport that you're going to get the return. Go to the next slide. Where the money comes from. I think we talked a little bit at last session. There's a federal funding program. Trust fund collects money, brings it to the states. The states brings it to the airports such as ours. The good points about the federal program, which some things I like to copy with the state, it's a 90% per share. That's a pretty good number there. And the funding you got allocated can actually carry over about a 3-year period. So you can actually, projects big enough, you could actually parlay the money into a little bit bigger amount that you go forward. The limitation, there's a lot of general aviation airports, and the federal government has not recognized this type of airport to the point it's only $150,000 annually, which really does not buy much of more than just maybe a design of a major project. There's eligibility for discretionary money that we compete nationally for, and the state has give you briefs about that. But generally speaking, that's the only thing that we could really rely on to make sure we maintain the infrastructure. And there's also federal program. If you talk economic development, you get zero consideration. And airports are economic engines. So there's a miss here. So the state has their own program that you guys authorized. The only some problems with it, I'll be honest with you, is that the funding, as we saw last presentation, doesn't really compare to our competitive states. I originally came from Florida. I had a 32-year career there, ran a large hub international airport and 3 general aviation airports. Basically, the states say they recognize those monies and they say, we have money, what do you want to spend it on? Including terminal buildings, hangars, and so forth, and definitely economic development projects. They understand the investment part of that return. Not today, but future hearings, we have people who are willing to speak from Florida and North Carolina to tell you how those programs operate, where the funds come from, and how they're distributed, and the return. North Carolina says they get a 5 times return on investment on the aviation program, on the state program, not the federal program, the state program. And that's the stuff that Georgia can also do the same thing, basically learn from the model that's been successful in other locations. So the state funding program is only 75%. When you talk about a project from a local share, when you're putting from maybe 5 to 10% up to 25%, that makes a big difference whether you can do that project or not. The state doesn't have carryover funding. We would hope that could be changed somehow so we can at least parlay the money into a bigger, very necessary project. And again, because there's limited amount of money available to the state, they do the best job they can with the money that's allocated. I got to give my hats off to them. But they're really trying to just do behind the curve. Safety projects, airfield projects, really trying to just do the minimum. And we like to open that door to not only economic projects, but safety projects, and actually maybe talk about 2 buckets of money, as we say, that we could get a better return. So, next slide. So what have we done locally here? I've been in this area for 8 years now. We have invested $20 million in infrastructure projects here, and our local tenants, and you'll hear from some of them today, have in turn invested over $60 million of their own money in their projects. And this is not including employees and wages and tax benefits to that. That's a 4 times return, and we think it's even higher than that as far as the type of investment that we maintain the infrastructure, which is our commitment, and help economic development by arrangements and agreements and so forth, that these could grow. Gulfstream built a new facility here you'll hear about. Our 2 FBOs built new facilities with their own money that we built the infrastructure for. We have a hotel here. Very unique to have a hotel in a general aviation airport that is setting all-time records and getting all kind of awards. And some of them you were staying there, so and you got a great view if you're looking over the airfield, which people really enjoy. So that's a quick summary. I could answer any questions specifically about this area, but you have some great speakers right behind me. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Robb. Just one question I have, and I ask it of everyone.
Sure.
In Glenn County, what does Glenn County, do they participate either through SPLOST or what other type of funding do you get from Glenn County besides what you generate on your own?
That's a good question. We run two airports, as I mentioned, Brunswick, Golden Isles, and St. Simons Island Airport. We have the advantage of that, specifically more for St. Simons Island, that the land that's access to airfield needs can be leased at market rates in the public sector. So we're able to derive revenue, non-aeronautical revenue, that really makes us self-sustaining. So the operating fund for both airports do not take from the Glenn County tax base, but Glenn County, which owns both airports, by the way, has invested capital money in projects for economic development projects. So the day-to-day operation, we don't draw on the local tax base, which is very unique in this type of industry, because like when you build a road, it's usually a government responsibility, like runways responsibility. But for this location right here, we're able to maintain our stable system for operation and maintenance, but for capital projects, this is where the funding needs to come across.
Thank you. If our other members have any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Well, you saw me punching my co-chairman here, and he said I made a mistake, because, there's not just legislators who are part of this study committee. We also have citizens members. And I neglected to call on them, just like Mr. Rob Burr is a member of this. Hope Macaluso right here, and from Falcon Field in Atlanta. Ken Warnock, see, right there you go, see right back there, from Emmanuel County Chamber of Commerce. Greg Teague, right here from Corey Engineering, and Larry Wade, Golden Isles Aviation, right here. And we appreciate the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor appointing these folks to help us, to just knowledge for people on the ground. Okay, next we have Scott. Now, how do you say your last name, Scott?
Hi there.
Stein.
I'm actually Scott McQuaid with the Golden Isles Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no, we
Jump
jumped order a little bit, and Scott
Okay.
Stylen will be joining us here momentarily. So thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you today, and welcome to the Golden Isles on behalf of the CVB. So with that, I'm going to jump right into my presentation to give you a little bit more understanding of our economic landscape right here on the ground and what it comprises of. So to give you some numbers, tourism is the #1 industry here in Glenn County as a single industry. The industry employs over 15,000 workers, and in 2020-2021 data, we had 3.3 million overnight visitors, 1.2 million day visitors, and those visitors brought to the community an economic impact of $1.6 billion. It certainly has been an interesting year and a half, going on 2 years with the recent pandemic, but what is really interesting is we have seen numbers like we've never seen before in the tourism industry. This slide is probably a little hard for some of you to see in the back there. I apologize for that, but I'll just read out the key stats. Total lodging revenue for 2020-2021 reached an all-time record of $229 million. This accounted for over $11 million in lodging tax collections. Keep in mind that lodging tax collections are 5% in Glenn County, so actually low in comparison to the rest of the state. And the fiscal year that we just closed out at the end of June outperformed the previous year by 42%. What's probably most miraculous is that it also outperformed our all-time record year of 2019 by 20%. and that graph gives you an indication of that growth. If we look at the past decade overall in Glenn County in lodging revenue within the hospitality sector, this industry has grown by 111% over the last decade. This is a really hard slide to see, but what it'll demonstrate to you, if you could see it, is not only the growth that we've seen in the last year, and you can see July is off again to a record start, performing actually 60% better than our all-time record July. But it also shows you this large trough in the middle of the slide, and that is our shoulder season, which is our winter season. Unlike Florida, that sees the majority of their visitors in the winter, we see the majority of ours in the spring and summer. And although this slide's a little outdated, it does give you an indication of the clip of growth that we have been on as far as spending to Glenn County. It has increased almost double the pace to spending along the coast as a whole. And Glenn County is one of the fastest growing regions along the coast. So for today, I wanted to share some very specific data on our fly market. And although we're generally dependent on a drive market, and that has actually played to our favor a bit during COVID, knowing that visitors are tending to drive more than fly market has been on our radar for a very long time. And every year we conduct research to get us an indication of how we can grow and expand our market, both domestically, internationally, as well as fly and drive. And this research is actually ongoing, and I'm always a little reticent to put ongoing research on the screen because it may change sometime later when we're finished. But I'm pretty confident in this survey sample. To give you an idea, as when we closed out the last look of this sample, in mid-July, we had over 30,000 respondents to this survey so far. So we feel really good about the survey data. As you can imagine, this is also taking place during COVID. So when you see that 99% of our visitors are coming from a domestic travel origin, that's to be expected with our borders being shut down. Typically, international business makes up about 10 to 12% of our total annual visits. The other thing you'll notice is that this data, and again, it's probably hard for you to see, is broken out by drive and fly market, so we can compare the two. But as we look at this data, as far as people who are flying, they tend to be first-time visitors and coming obviously from further distances. When we ask those people on the most recent upcoming trip being planned to the Golden Isles, how many nights would they travel or plan on staying in the Golden Isles? Again, you'll see these red stars on the screen, or if you could see them, I'll highlight them. 47% of people that were flying said that they were staying for 6 nights or more. When you compare that to the drive market, they're averaging only 4.1 nights. So the traveler that's coming in here by aircraft is spending a longer period of time. And you can also see that they're choosing our hotels as their primary place to stay and our resorts. So although, of course, they stay at vacation rentals and bed and breakfasts and of the like, they're tending to pick those products over the others. As you can see, the fly market spreads throughout the entire region. The Golden Isles is comprised of 4 barrier islands: Little St. Simons, Sea Island, St. Simons, Jekyll Island, and the mainland of Brunswick. And those fly travelers really spread out throughout the entire destination. They're not choosing one place over the other. But here's where I think the data will get more compelling. This is going to give you a landscape of who our visitors are. You know they contribute $1.6 billion to our economic impact. But here's where they're considering traveling before they come here. Keep in mind, Savannah and Tybee Island is the #1 answer that you'll see here, but we also know from further data that 30% of the travelers that are going to Savannah or Tybee are actually coming here as well. So we don't necessarily consider Savannah a competitor. They're actually a partner in bringing visitors here because we share those visitors. but Charleston, South Carolina, Hilton Head, St. Augustine, Amelia Island, Outer Banks, Myrtle Beach, the Panhandle, Kiowa, Florida, etc. So you can see who we're competing with, obviously out of state, but the southeast region and getting visitors here. And we know that they have choices, and this is a double-edged sword. If I could just answer your question of tell us what we need or what you all could provide for us, it's air service. Because although we're getting air service, we can see based on the past, almost 46% of that air service is coming through Jacksonville, leaving, although they're coming into our region, they're creating that economic impact in Jacksonville, renting their cars there and providing funds out of state to get to the Golden Isles. And although our current data isn't necessarily secure yet because it's still ongoing, we see Jacksonville and Savannah are growing on the bookends of this destination, which often leads our local airport to struggle to try to find air service when it's being competed with by the two bookends of the resort. And of course, those two airports, just for your knowledge, are approximately an hour away on each side. That doesn't, of course, include all your travel time for car rental and whatnot. So as you all that flew into this destination, if you did, there's nothing more special to arriving here. If you arrived in Brunswick, you could actually be at your destination 15 to 20 minutes later, which is pretty special. But in addition to that, Fly Traveler and where they're looking at and where they're coming, we also understand that they make a much greater economic impact. When we look at the spending per visitor versus the drive market versus the fly, number one responses are all over $1,000 up to $3,000 or more economic impact. When you look at the drive market, it actually is leaning towards more under $1,000 or less. So we know they're a higher spending visitor. This slide you'll never see, and I just pulled up this data today, which I really found fascinating. So I'll try to read it for you, but what you see here is this is live data that we get from our booking dashboards that tells us how many people are on the books, in other words, they have booked their lodging and where they're coming from. And as you can see, all these states, Virginia, Minnesota, New York, Miami, Michigan, Missouri, their economic impact of revenue per guest tops out in the $5,000 to $6,000, $7,000 range, whereas you look at our drive market coming from, of course, Atlanta, Macon, Athens, etc., their revenue per guest is about $1,900. So we know the Fly Traveler is spending twice the amount as the drive market. And this last slide just tells you where all those bookings that are currently on our books as we speak, where they're being placed. And as you can see, there's tremendous opportunity for the Golden Isles to expand air service. When we look at how much money those Fly Travelers spend and where they're coming from. But we also, although we've tried as a team for many years to expand that service, we need the funds to be able to be invested in expanding that service. It doesn't necessarily come naturally when you have such fierce competition from Jacksonville Airport. So at the end of the day, when we wrap up all this data, I think the more money that our local airports have to both expand and improve infrastructure allows us to really focus on how we grow our market, how we continue to sustain the #1 sector of business here in Glenn County, which is tourism, and then how do we compete more effectively with those listed destinations that I mentioned. And certainly expanding air service is one way of doing that and improving the infrastructure to allow air service to expand. And there are many benefits, as you can see. It helps us compete better, and it also adds a great quality of life for our visitors, our residents, and then also helps us attract new business. And I believe that is the end of my show. I'll be happy to entertain your questions.
Mr. McQuaid, on your presentation, you talk about flying into the Glenn County Airport versus flying right here to St. Simons, and I'm kind of curious, what the balance would be if I looked at the number of people that are flying in to Glenn County versus flying into this airport right here on the island.
As far as volume is concerned, at least in our survey data, we see the majority of traffic coming into Brunswick. Now, Scott Stylen, who will be coming up next, will probably talk a little bit more about private aviation, which this airport serves, and how essential it is to Sea Island specifically. So on the mass scale, certainly more passenger traffic comes in through the Delta serviced hub, but this airport is vital to Sea Island, but also to other resorts as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Just a couple, just real quick questions. I just did some silly math up here, but is it accurate to say about 8% of the survey traffic, the surveys that you did, about 8% of the total traffic was air, came in via air?
Yeah, typically we're about or did you say 8%?
Total
Yeah.
traffic.
So typically, again, this isn't necessarily a normal year, but about 80% of the market is a drive market, with 20% being a fly market. And
Okay. So it's just skewed because it's
it
heavy drive
is
this year.
skewed
Okay.
this particular year with less people flying in.
And then I just want to make sure I tracked. You said 11.4 million, and you just said lodging taxes alone that go to Glenn County. And it is correct though that none of that tax revenue, that tax base, comes back to the airport authority. Correct? All that stays with the county. Okay,
Yeah,
so-
and that's total tax revenue, both Jekyll Island and Glenn County, and it does not get distributed back to the airport.
okay, which would be roughly 2.5 million annually if that did get redistributed based off of fly-in versus drive-in. And then just the other question I had is, and I'm sorry, I should have asked Mr. Burr while he was up there, but I just want to make sure I understand the way you guys are structured here. Essentially, you said and if you can answer this, that's fine, but you're cost neutral as far as cost, not investment, but just actual operations cost neutral, and that's just based off of non-aviation land lease, avgas, obviously, and then I'm guessing hangar and ramp fees on the airport. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. The way we're structured, we're very much business-oriented and partnerships, so we're basically a landlord for leasing land. So most of our revenue is driven by leasing properties to other businesses who operate on the airport or off the airport. Our model here is actually very much different than most airports around the country. But that's our model right there. A little bit difference on the market. CVB we partner with them for marketing purposes. So some of their marketing money definitely goes to support air service.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Now we have the other Scott, and it's Stylen. Stylen. Thank you, and President and CEO of Sea Island Company.
Thank you for having me. My name is Scott Stylen. I'm President and CEO of Sea Island Company. I'm also the chair of the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in the Golden Isles. And Scott's taller than me, so I had to reduce this a little bit. But I just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a local perspective. I thought it would be important for the committee to kind of understand the impact of tourism on our Golden Isles here, and I appreciate what Scott was able to share. Let me bring it down a little bit more locally, and particularly as it relates to air travel here. Just as by way of background, Sea Island will be celebrating our 93rd anniversary this October. Our history with this airport dates back, I don't know, I guess almost 80 of those years or so, when the company donated the land for this airport to become a part of it. So we've had a long, long history of partnership with not only St. Simons Airport, but with all of our local airports. Air travel is really important to us. In contrast to the overall Golden Isles traffic, about 70% of my business flies in. Now, that dropped to about 50% in the last year, but in a regular year, about 70% of our business flies in. And as Scott correctly indicated, we do a tremendous amount of private business that is here that comes into our two local FBOs, both at Manning in Brunswick and here at St. Simons. A couple of other points of background for you from that perspective. Sea Island Company, we did an economic impact study a number of years ago where we contribute well over $700 million on an annual basis to the local, just Glynn County economy. It really just goes to underscore the impact of the tourism industry and how we can support the overall business of our local community. Thankfully, you know, when we started 90 plus years ago, we were one of, if not the sole economic engine for this community down here. And thankfully, we have broadened and diversified as a community in various industries and are able to weather a lot of what goes on, including this most recent pandemic. Just to put a couple of other points in perspective, we do a lot of work with all of the private aviation companies, but I was meeting with Wheels Up maybe a month or so ago, and just to provide a little impact on what this little airport here does, we are the number 12 destination in the entire Wheels Up system here at St. Simons. And the loop, the round trip between PDK in Atlanta and St. Simons is number 4 in their system. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 were all New York based. It was Teterboro, which is New Jersey, to Nantucket, White Plains to Nantucket, and Teterboro to Palm Beach. So we feel pretty good that this PDK Atlanta system and where our little St. Simons, it's really actually St. Simons and Manning, compare on a scale across the country of where we stand. In order to continue this partnership, we fully support some of the initiatives that Rob was outlining in terms of what this airport needs, what this community needs. Locally here, with the EMAS system, the ability to continue to have that jet traffic come into St. Simons will impact not just Sea Island, but our entire community in a very, very significant way. Taking away that impact would be catastrophic. Taking away and following, not following through on what would be there would have a real detrimental impact on this community. And it's not just on the lodging community and the other hotel companies that are my colleagues in this, in here. It's restaurants, it's other services business, it's everything that really builds based on what this destination is and has become and will continue to become. The other thing is, as it relates to trying to expand our operation, as Scott McQuaid mentioned, we'd love to be able to bring more traffic into our local community through the Brunswick Airport. We at Sea Island get our airlift from the local FBOs from Jacksonville and from Savannah. Savannah recently has become more of a contributor, but as Scott mentioned, Jacksonville has the lion's share of that business that comes in. Investments to expand lift into Brunswick directly, continued investment into Savannah and partnership with them will continue to allow us to be able to be where we want to be and do what we want to do and to give back and contribute to this community in the way that we've discussed from an economic impact perspective. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there, take any questions, and thank you all very, very much for coming, for your participation on the committee in what is a very, very, very important issue for our local community.
So just kind of, I wanted to add on to that a little bit if I could, and thank you so much, Scott. And the FBO, Golden Isles Aviation, we consider that we're a front door for the community here. As people fly in, we're the aviation service for them to fuel them, hangar them, tie down, and so forth. We greet them, get them into rental cars or into Sea Island transportation. So just to say how we feel like we are kind of a front door to our amenities here as well, Sea Island being a great example of that. And my chatting with corporate flight departments over the years, we've had this FBO for 34 years, And so Scott has a lot of board meetings and a lot of events and so forth that go to Sea Island. And one of the things that we hear from the corporate flight departments is that because the airport is here on St. Simons, and it's about a 5-minute drive to the lodge, maybe 7 minutes over to Sea Island, it's one of the key reasons that they chose this area to come. Certainly the excellence of the Cloister Hotel and what they do in those operations. But for security and safety reasons, they don't want their board to drive 25, 30 minutes from someplace. They want them to drive 5 minutes. And they can keep that safe, and they can keep that in their eyes and so forth. So St. Simons has, I guess, just the airport being right here on the island and right here with Sea Island has been a benefit for. So for that reason, the EMAS that they're talking about, the Engineered Material Arresting System, which is something that if an airplane goes too far, it can't stop, this grabs it in a sense. The pavement grabs the airplane. It's kind of expensive, but we're landlocked here. We got some nice golf courses on one end, and we have some houses on the other, so we can't expand the length of the runway. What we need to do is make the ends of the runway safe. So those type of investments that need to be made here for what is probably, this airport experiences a lot of traffic just because of its destination. But it sits in that $150,000 a year federal money deal, whereas Brunswick gets $1 million every year. St. Simons gets $150,000. But we have a lot more landings and takeoffs here than Brunswick does. We're far busier in terms of the number of aircraft. So for that is some of the additional reason that we're looking for funds from the state for help to meet that EMAS need that we have.
So Mr. White, what is an EMAS? Is that what?
Yeah, so
MAS?
this is a section of pavement. So if you consider it looks like the runway a little bit, but it's concrete that's almost kind of made like where it's soft. It's almost like popcorn. So if you rolled on it with something that had weight, it would crush into that concrete and kind of grab it. It'd be like going into rubble. But it looks like pavement, but it will break apart. And because it breaks apart, it stops and kind of grabs the landing gear of the aircraft and slows it down. It's like going into mud or going into sand. As you see the truck drivers go up on a rise, and they go into a sandy situation where it's grabbing their wheels. Well, EMAS, in a sense, grabs the landing gear of the aircraft and arrests the aircraft from going further. PDK just put EMAS on one end of one of their runways as well because they're landlocked. So because of the volume of traffic that we get here, if we didn't have the volume of traffic, maybe not so necessary. And because of the type of traffic that we get here, which is a lot of turbine aircraft, we need to keep this airport safe. In a sense, we need to keep it because the FAA demands that it meets a certain requirement. And EMAS is the only thing that allows us to meet that requirement for safety.
And I assume it doesn't damage the landing gear or may, but not.
Oh,
correct.
It probably you're having a bad day if you're using the EMAS anyway.
Okay.
But
What does that
in
cost?
But you're having a
essence,
better day than landing on my 14th green.
Yeah.
That's true.
Oh,
My question for you is because is it because of commercial aviation that you need the EMAS? Are you trying to get a
No, well-
elevated FAA status?
No, there's no commercial traffic on St. Simons. It's all general aviation. It's because of the type of aircraft that use St. Simons and want to use St. Simons. As a matter of fact, we're about 200 feet. Now, we can get this extra 200 feet because we have displaced thresholds. So we need to continue to click to where we get 5,000 usable feet. Actually, we have about almost 6,000 feet of pavement, but 5,000 feet that the FAA kind of gives us, actually 48. So it's not going to elevate the airport to get more traffic. It just keeps it safer.
I'm trying to match the two comments you made to make sure I'm up to speed.
Yeah.
You talk about the FAA funding sources going from 150,000 to $1 million a year, and then the safety aspect. Are those two statements tied together at all?
Well, the statement was that this airport, which has a lot more traffic than Brunswick in terms of number of landings and takeoffs, in terms of the turbine arena or even in the piston arena, only gets 150,000 a year to do its stuff, to do its job for its infrastructure. Brunswick, on the other hand, because it is a commercial airport, gets $1 million a year.
Okay.
So we have a tough time over here keeping up with projects that we need, and yet we're busier.
I understand. Thank you.
I guess my question, young money, thinking all the time, what is something like this for this airport would it cost?
So that's going to cost, it could be both ends, two ends, and it costs anywhere between $4 and $5 million an end. So it's between $8 and $10 million for the package, in a sense.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Down
if
there.
I may,
Yes,
just
sir. Heard an echo somewhere.
just to kind of echo what he's saying. So an EMAS system, basically what it does, it allows you to use more of your runway without actually extending your runway. And it allows larger aircraft to land on your runway, especially in a situation like this where you're landlocked, like he was talking about. And like Representative Singleton said, if you use the EMAS system, you're having a really bad day. The pilot didn't do what they were supposed to do. But that safety aspect, by putting it on the airfield, it reduces the requirements that the FAA has in place for airfield and runway links and safety in the safety aspects around those runways. And so it's a way to utilize space whenever you may not have the amount of space that would normally be required under normal circumstances without technology like this. And it's pretty expensive. So it's just one of those examples of things that where funding sources are needed to try to help address those kind of problems, not only here at St. Simons, but in other airports across the state. So,
Thank you, Chairman. So that's cheaper than your 14th tee, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm just extending it over there. I'm teasing. Thank you, Scott.
Thank
Sure
you.
appreciate it. Thank you,
Thank
both
you.
of y'all. Next, we have Ellis Wood from the Statesboro Bullock County Airport. Met this fine gentleman. We have a common friend just a few minutes ago.
Thank you very much. And since both Scotts are substantially taller than me, I'm going to lower it some more. I would make one introduction before I start. Kathy Boykin is here. Kathy, if you'd stand. Kathy is our airport manager. And my first disclaimer is when you hear me say we, that means she did it and I watched. So if I refer to a we, the second disclaimer is that I'm pretty old and fat and pretty much a has-been. Tyler knows I've served on some state positions, and I was asking a gentleman one time about giving us a historic review of some Memorial Day events. And he said, as he introduced his remarks, he said, well, the first thing I can tell you is that Ellis asked me to make some remarks about history, but Ellis and I are both history ourselves. So we're here to speak to the economic advantages and needs of Statesboro Airport. We did have a unique occurrence last year that we'll review later on, but we are in Statesboro. We're a level 3 airport. We also get the $150,000 entitlement plus other funds as they're available. Kathy and her crew recognize, Larry, that our airport in many cases is not only the front door, but especially with a lot of industry users, it's the only door that many people see. So they try very hard to make sure that's a very pleasant response for their first time. Next, please. We do have a lot of education emphasis. We have a local active Civil Air Patrol unit. We do tours, and we do, Kathy is very high on promoting career days at our local high school. We have a number of businesses on the airport that do generate revenue, and we get revenue from leases from those facilities. The plane on the right is actually a subcontractor to UPS that flies in and out of our airport twice a day, comes in early every morning, and leaves every night. You all know that we certainly have Georgia Southern University, but we also have East Georgia College and Ogeechee Technical College that both have some aviation interest, and we support those interested, whether it's through charter services. Our emergency response CAP does a lot of training on our airport. The bottom slide is some training they're doing. Civil Air Patrol does search and rescue operations. We have been deemed a reliever airport for the Port of Savannah in case of a catastrophic event. And the Coast Guard Auxiliary actually has a plane based at Statesboro. Kathy works very hard on community outreach. Every year, for a number of years prior to last year, we had an aviation day where we emphasized the airport and its importance to citizens. That was totally funded by our sponsors. The money that's generated from that has always gone into local causes. Last year went to support a local youth home there. Do have a very active EAA program that promotes our Young Eagles flights, as well as this was a historic B-25 that came through a few years ago. We do have charter services available. The interesting thing about Phoenix is that they have been actively involved for the last few months in Statesboro, flying COVID samples out of Statesboro on a daily basis to some other location for analysis. We do have a number of military training exercises. State Patrol certainly is an active user. We have crop dusters and we have air evac. The slide on the bottom right is one of the Georgia Forestry Commission helicopters practicing bucket drops. As most of you know, the State Patrol and the Forestry Commission both have helicopters that are equipped and trained for bucket drops. We have a forestry unit that's assigned to our airport that covers about 32 counties. We, like most level 3 airports, are limited in our sources of revenue, and that's one reason that we were here today to thank you elected officials and you DOT officials for the help that y'all have given us through so many years. We're limited by hangar rent, fuel sales, some business leases, and then we had a very non-traditional aviation-related revenue-producing event last year, and we're going to highlight that just for a minute. This was a movie based on a book called Devotion there's a true story that happened during the Korean War. It was centered around 2 individuals. The fellow on the left is a fellow named Tom Hutner. They grew up in very different relationships. Mr. Hutner grew up in the northeast part of the United States in the 40s and 50s. Jesse Brown grew up as a sharecropper in Mississippi. He became the first black American aviator to take off and land on a carrier deck. And we'd like to show the movie now, please, for just a minute. This was a Fox News release. This was a Fox News release that actually came out about 3 years before we had this contact about the movie. Well, it might not play.
Tom and Jesse were devoted to their country. They were devoted to each other. Devotion was just this overarching theme, and it was just fitting for men going off to serve their country.
Adam Makos is the author of Devotion, an epic story of heroism, friendship, and sacrifice. And what a story it is. Tom Hutner came from the country clubs of New England, Jesse Brown from the sharecropper fields of Mississippi. And when they met as pilots in the Korean War, Jesse was surprised. Tom came over to shake his hand.
It was unusual for him that this Tom Hutner was so open to being friends with a black pilot. And so it took Jesse a little while to get used to the fact that he could trust this man.
By 1950, Jesse was the first black carrier pilot in the Navy. And he and Tom were flying combat missions over the Chosin Reservoir in Korea, where 100,000 Chinese troops encircled 20,000 U.S. Marines.
The only way to find the enemy when you're seeking them out is to get low and slow. And in this case, Jesse's plane was hit by a random shot, a golden bullet, if you will.
Jesse saw a pasture on top of a snow-covered mountain. Somehow, he guided his Corsair down to a hard landing.
The minute his plane hits, the clock is ticking. The enemy can see the smoke rising because the airplane is slowly catching fire, and they begin moving in that direction.
And what did Tom Hudner do?
Tom Hudner did something that has not been attempted since. It had never been attempted before. He said, "I'm going in," and he made an intentional crash landing in that same pasture alongside of Jesse's plane.
Tom shoveled snow into the engine to stop the fire, then tried to pull Jesse from the plane. But he was trapped in the wreckage and had serious injuries.
And he almost practically held his hand and stayed with him as the darkness set in, as Jesse was fading. And then finally, he took home Jesse's last words. And those were, "Tell Daisy how much I love her." A last message to his wife.
He died with me and my mom on his mind and asked Tom to deliver a message of love to my mom and me.
Daisy was Jesse's wife, and Pam was their only child, not quite two.
To know that he had this great love for my mom, that his last thoughts were of her. It just makes me feel that I have a legacy that is difficult to live up to almost.
A helicopter flew 13 miles behind enemy lines to rescue Tom, who didn't want to leave his dead wingman.
The pilot said, "We have to go. Tom, you stay here, you die. You join Jesse." Tom shouted at the cockpit. He said, "Jesse, we'll be back for you somehow, someday."
Tom thought he would be court-martialed for crashing his plane. Instead, he was the first member of the Navy to receive the Medal of Honor in the Korean War.
Did he carry the memory of Jesse Brown through his career, through his life?
He helped put Jesse's widow through college. When Tom received a cash award from the grateful residents of his town, he sent that check down to Daisy.
Thank you. So how does this fit into the Statesboro Airport? Labor Day a year ago, Kathy got a phone call from a Mr. Smith who was interested in whether or not our airport would be receptive to the shooting of a movie. So we were apprehensive, certainly knew nothing about this story, didn't know anything about Mr. Smith. We immediately began meeting and having Zoom meetings with his producer from Hollywood. Turned out at the time there were 6 airports being considered for the production of this movie. Narrowed down to 4, and it narrowed down to where Statesboro was chosen. I'll show you a few of the slides that were taken during this time. They built an entire carrier deck. This couldn't have happened without the DOT. We had to, the first comment that the producer wanted to know was, could we shut down the airport where they could shoot this movie, and certainly we knew that was not a consideration. Kathy started the conversation with the DOT about options and alternatives. It was agreed that we could close part of the secondary runway and work out some operation standards that Colette was very instrumental in to be able to continue operations at the airport. So these people built an entire carrier deck, not a scale model, on the airport. I would just make a comment to notice all the containers. As I was there, just about on a daily basis, we were wondering what were they doing with different parts. Most of this stuff was built off-site and brought in. It's metal, it's not wood. I couldn't figure out what the containers were for. It turns out, if you'll notice on the top of them, they got a shower curtain, and you'll see in a minute where they used it basically to change backdrops. Next slide, please. This is what that west end of the airport looked like with support tents and the carrier deck and the containers. We were fortunate during this time. My understanding is there are only about 15 F-4 Corsairs flying in the world. We were fortunate to have 4 they brought in from all over the United States that stayed at our little airport for about 3 weeks. This is the actual print that had become available during the time of the movie. The significant thing about this print, it's in the boardroom at Statesboro Airport, is Kathy got it about a week before the entire crew left, and she was able to get signatures on it. So this is, though it's a numbered print, this is the only unique one in the world. Next one, please. This is a picture of Mr. Hudner receiving his Medal of Honor from President Truman. They brought the most immaculate DC-3. Next slide. The purpose of this airplane was to ferry Miss Jessie Brown in to receive her accolades from the government. This thing came from Memphis, and during the time it was there, they raised it up and down with a crane to simulate flying or landing. Next slide, please. This is what our ramp looked like for about 3 days. See the DC-3, the car they brought in to escort her, some of the movie production equipment, some of their electrical equipment. The middle slide on the bottom was actually Korean War soldiers. They had rented one of those hangars and built up an entire Korean communication center. The bottom left shows the costumes and the changing they were constantly doing. Next slide, please. This was inside our terminal. Remember that Kathy had to keep operations going the whole time. So in our regular boardroom and our conference room, they set up 7 makeup stations. During our lobby, they had, this was all during COVID. This was the most COVID-conscious group I've ever been around. They would reprimand you in a minute about not wearing a mask or not being COVID compliant. Next slide, please. This is 3 of the Corsairs. You notice the backdrop now has been changed to a night scene. Next slide, please. One day as I was walking, I shot these slides of the different cars that were there during the production. They were from all over the United States. Next slide. So what does this mean to the Statesboro Airport? Well, we tried to do the best we could to write it down with the help of the movie producers. They would not allow us to release any material till the time they said so when it was over. They paid Statesboro Airport $529,000. They bought at least $14,000 worth of fuel that we could track. We could track over $600,000 at local hotels. They used a local tent company for over $50,000. They had between 100 and 120 rental cars that were buying gas. Local citizens who were some of these actors you saw, people that were dressing up, there were between 100 and 200 of those. We don't know how many meals. Chick-fil-A logged over $6,000, and one grocery provider logged over $25,000. So there was over $1 million spent with this one non-traditional exercise that wouldn't have been made possible without the DOT. Next slide, please. We are like everybody else. We try to make the airport self-sustaining. We've been able to do that. Kathy has two full-time employees, counting herself, and 3 part-time. We are fortunate to have county crews that help with maintenance requirements. Recent projects that would not have been available without DOT assistance. In 2019, we were able to totally rehab the runway. The cost on that project was $1.4 million. As has already been said here, there's no way that a $150,000 entitlement could handle a runway rehab. I think it's very commendable here to again remember that Carol and her crew oversee the same number of regulated airports in Georgia as they do in Florida. But as Rob said, we do it on the 20th. They do it on the 20th of the budget that Florida has. So there's a drastic need. We recognize that a major need is pavement maintenance. If we lose the pavement we got, I've been in the paving business all my life, and it's my understanding when we put that stuff down, it immediately starts deteriorating. And if we don't maintain the pavements we got, we will lose a very valuable asset. That's all right, go ahead. We are currently working on some needs that we won't be able to accomplish without some type of assistance. We have a waiting list of over 30 people wanting regular T-hangers. We're searching very hard for options to try to build at least one more 10-unit T-hanger. The bottom left of the right slide shows a white area. Our local government has just exercised a contract to build an $800,000 new corporate hangar there. We have a waiting list for 5 corporate airplanes. We hope to be able to service 2 of them in this hangar. We have constant issues like obstruction of clearances. Our airport, like many of yours, has a secondary runway that does not have any entitlement with the FAA. We have 2 options with that runway. Sometime in the near future, it'll either have to be rehabbed through some type of outside assistance, or it will have to be closed. So the assistance that we get from the DOT is immeasurable. The staff there, I just could not commend enough. We've been thankful. I was with a group with Miss McNeil a year or 2 ago at St. Mary's just prior to that airport being closed. And so we're thankful that we're where we are, and we're thankful for the assistance that you all have given us through the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Where's Kathy? She wears a Superman shirt, don't you?
Yes, she's pretty important.
we sure appreciate it. I mean, I just have one question, just for me. Thank you for showing us that video. That was very, very touching.
Well, we actually didn't find that till we had already entered into the contract. When the airport committee found it, and it had been released by Fox about 3 years before. And I need to say something I forgot. It had been put out by Fox about 3 years before Mr. Smith called Kathy. Let me continue something I should have done. The Mr. Smith that called Kathy was a Mr. Fred Smith who owns FedEx, started FedEx. Very affluent person. He flew in his Challenger 300 and stayed at Statesboro while this was being filmed. He had two daughters that were involved in the production, not in the movie, but involved in the production, and they were part of the crew that stayed there so long.
I guess mine, you talked about the charters. I'm just curious, from Statesboro. Yeah, I think you showed 4 different charter organizations out of your. Where are they going? I mean, I'm just.
They're not based there. They come in and pick up people like university professors and university coaches. We have a lot of business transients that use charter aircraft in and out. I do not know where the Phoenix crowd is taking the COVID samples. That's the second part of that story we never have determined.
Any members have any? Thank you very much. We sure appreciate it. Yay. Let's give it a Next we have up Mr. Bain Stone, City of Hazelhurst.
Thank you very much for inviting Hazelhurst to come. We sort of feel with all the goings on that is going on at Statesboro and Sea Island and St. Simons and Glenville, Glenn County. But let me tell you something. There's another airport not too far from here, about 80 miles away, that's equally important, and we appreciate you having us here. The first slide that you see here, and this is our terminal headquarters. And go ahead with the next one. This is some shots we have available, cokes and drinks and whatnot when the pilots come in. You quite often find them taking a nap there. This is antiquated. This is where the pilots used to file their flight plans, and now it's in my pocket. I've got more computer capability and everything for filing flight plans than used to. When I was at the University of Georgia, the computer that we put in was about as long as the height of that wall down there, and it was in a environmental control room. And now 10 times or more information is in my shirt pocket. And of course, pilots will use that. That cot is used quite often because folks coming into Hazler as pilots, sometimes they need a wink or two of sleep while the executives are out. Go ahead. Of course, that's our airport authority room, and sometimes they use that for transactions and business as well. We have a courtesy van. In fact, we have two. That one stays under the shed. The keys in it is full of gas and fuel. And when our pilots come into Hazlehurst and the guests, we don't have Uber in Hazlehurst. And so they use this to get into town or wherever they need to go. That's courtesy. That's the this green area here is where you see our terminal base there. And of course, that larger hangar that you see behind it there is the largest hangar we've got. And we'll get into that later on. We've got, they mentioned, I believe it was here at Jekyll Island, did they say they had two jets based here or something, 2 or 3?
Yes, sir.
Well, let me tell you something. We got 2 based in Hazlehurst, Georgia, too. 2 jets, and one, or both are owned there. Only one is based in that terminal there. And so I guess our need when we get into that area, terminal space is very important. I'll get into more of that later. Keep going. We have a lot of air traffic. We try to welcome our travelers back and forth going from all over the United States and going into Florida. And we sell a lot of avgas and jet fuel there. Of course, the helicopter you see there is not our typical helicopter. We're still a big agricultural area, and we got a lot of forestry land. And it's not uncommon for big tankers to be in there with the various chemicals and uses. So we have a lot of spraying going on at our airport. It's very important to both forestry and agriculture. Go ahead. As I said, we have gas and jet fuel there. And you keep seeing these nice airplanes there. Go ahead. We've just been fortunate enough to have our runway completely refurbished from one end to the other. We also put in some exit ramps that created a little bit better safe situation as you go along. This is 15, of course, and if you notice the taxiway over on the right, we've been fortunate enough to get that in the last few years, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Stop it there. Just put a pause on that. Our airport is 60 years old. Back in the 40s and 50s, we were primarily a farming community. We did have a lot of pulpwood and timber, and but we had some good citizens there and some progressive thinkers, and they said we've got to balance agriculture with industry. And being old country folks, I don't know whether you folks know anything about it, but we used to get a Sears and Roebuck catalog about this thick. I don't know whether y'all ever remember those or not. But in that Sears and Roebuck catalog, we did a lot of shopping, so we felt, well, good gracious, if we're going to spend all our money with Sears and Roebuck, maybe we can manufacture some of their goods. So back in that area, we went to Sears and we began to make, we had a small sawmill there. We began to make step ladders. And it was a wood product. And then after we got it to making the step ladders, we found out that Ford Motor Company over in Detroit needed a wooden truck bed. We built manufactured truck beds for Ford Motor Company. And then a little bit later, Sears also came down with all their sleeping bags and tent materials and whatnot. So we wound up with about 400 people manufacturing that type of material for Sears. We had the truck beds and the ladders over at another for Sears. And those people would have to land regionally, and getting to Hazelhurst was a problem. And but so in 1960, though, we saw that if we were going to continue to grow, that we had to have an airport, and we got land donated for 125 acres, and we built our runway. During that time, we had gotten in with Patchogue Plymouth on Long Island, New York, and they were coming in and out of Hazelhurst. The folks from Chicago were coming in and out of Hazelhurst. Detroit, later on U.S. Steel. We had a U.S. Steel plant there, and U.S. Steel was flying their jets in there, and they needed that emergency thing dead at the end because they were bringing in that jet when they shouldn't have been. It wasn't quite long enough. But at any rate, all of these companies, we were importing manufacturing possibilities. Later, and that's where I got involved. We got involved with Otis Elevator Company. And we were building the escalator trusses that you get on. You got a lower landing and the incline and the upper. And we put the machines and all in those things. In fact, I made several trips to the Twin Towers in New York. I think about the last floor, I was on about the 100th floor. And a lot of the steel, when you saw those planes hit those Twin Towers, we were involved in shipping a lot of that steel. But a lot of that steel came from Hazelhurst, Georgia. And Otis Elevator Company was in and out of Hazelhurst a lot. So we needed that airport. That airport has been a lifeblood to our community. Now, as you know, a lot of our industry has left us and gone abroad. First it went to Mexico, and then now we're importing with the shipping industry, which we're proud of, and our ports in Savannah and here. We're very proud of that. But a lot of our industry left, but guess what we've done? We've bred and built our own. We got the largest sawmill in the United States in Hazelhurst, Georgia. They've got a jet, two more nice twin-engine planes. And we've also got one of the largest auction company. People fly into this airport from all over the United States coming in buying industrial and farm equipment and backhoes and bulldozers and tractors. So this airport is busy because every month we have a big equipment auction, and a lot of people are coming in. And by the way, the local company, the auction company, has a large twin, and they want a jet. Now, I've already got one jet that I'm having to farm out, and we're going to get to that in a minute. We've got one already. We've got another fellow wanting a jet, and we don't have hangar space. All right, now, let's wait, one more thing. I'm like Tyler down there. I, too, am a private pilot. Being involved with Otis and doing a little flying myself, I got a private ticket in, I believe it's 1967. I went out to the airport one day, and I'd been taking flying lessons for a pretty good while, and my instructor, he said, well, we're going to make it up to McRae in Dublin today. And he said, and we got to talking about what we were going to do. And then finally we got the plane all ready to go. And he said, by the way, you're going by yourself. You pilots remember when you soloed that first flight. And that's one reason I'm as passionate as I am about this airport and how vital it is. I've told you about how it was important for bringing industry in. And now we've been progressive enough that we've got factories, and we've got another McPherson Manufacturing Company is the other that owns the jet. He wants to build a hangar out there. We need a hangar there. The Davis that's got the auction company wants a hangar there. I've got a total of 5 corporate businesses that we didn't bring from New England. We've homegrown them because of that airport. So you're dealing with these boys that's got bigger problems, but let me tell you what, we've got some problems too. and it's integral and very important to our economy. We've got 3 mechanics out here now, but by the way, all of our T-hangers are full. We've got a waiting list. We right now could fill another T-hanger. We do want them a little bit bigger because we've got so many small twins that need to be housed. And if we could get just a little 10 or 12 more foot in our T-hangers, we can put some small twins in there as well. And we've got, like I say, 4, the Beasley company that's got several twins and the Jet, they've got to have a new hangar. And right now we're furnishing some space, but I'm going to make the rent on the place high enough they're going to have to move. I got to have that hangar. We got some mechanics there, and we need about 4 more right now, maintenance personnel that to service all the, because every hangar we've got is full, and they're having to take their truck and equipment and go out of town because we don't have the facilities there for that. Let's move on there. Now this is some pictures that we took recently. This is the new refurbished runway and the taxiway we have over there. First, go ahead. More shots of the new airport, and I got some night shots because I thought you'd go out to, and this y'all can laugh at this if you want to, but at night you can go out to Hazlehurst Airport and you think you're in Atlanta. Go ahead. But that's our airport now. It's very well equipped, and hold it right there. With this airport, I've explained to you that it was instrumental in us getting industry in Hazlehurst, and now it's very instrumental in the industries that we've built, supplying and their needs, and they're flying all over the United States. And I'm sort of a halfway gourmet cook. You can look at me and tell I like to eat. So I do a lot of gourmet cooking. And the food that you cook at this airport is somewhat similar, by the way, to gourmet cook. The product needs to be good, needs to taste good. The mouth is a very important ingredient in food. But let me tell you something else. Appearance is important as well. Because I know I love the North Georgia mountains, but my wife and I lost my wife 7 years ago to cancer. And at the time she died, she and I had been married 54 years. So I've been without her for about 7 years. But she and I in cooking, we wanted the plate to be pleasant, and that was important. And I know we've got the mountains, and we've got the beautiful city of Atlanta, and all landscapes. But let me tell you something, people like to fly into Hazlehurst. You know why? When they come down that taxiway and look out there, it's usually, I don't have them in this picture, but it's usually full of geese. Let's go to the next slide. When they're right along here, normally inside this fence, we had to put the fence there. Deer, you'll see 5 or 6 deer hopping along that fence line there. Go ahead. And on this, it's not uncommon at all, as they going down about to get on 33. When they turn that curve, there's normally 6 or 7 deer out there. So our people love to come into Hazlehurst Airport. It's sort of scenic. The other, I think there's one more slide. Yeah, back it up to the other one. Finally, folks, through the years, that airport has been the lifeblood of commerce, jobs in our community. It still is. Even for a small town like Hazlehurst, that's the lifeblood important to it. Now, in doing all this, we've been able to extend our runway. We needed some additional length. We've been able to put in the taxiway. And then now we've refurbished all of our apron and refurbished our runway. We need the hangars now. I could put 5 corporate aircraft in hangars now if I had them. They're having to be housed somewhere else. I need corporate hangars bad. I need one more set of T-hangars at least, a little larger, like I said, for handling small twins. And one other thing, I think this lady's going to be getting out of the picture pretty quick, so if I'm saying anything that'll hurt her, I don't think she's going to be gone so quick. We've decided that on this airport, we're going to erect a statue of Carol Comer. You folks, with all that we've got done at this little airport for a little spot. By the way, now we also have a SPLOST fund. We have $100,000 a year in SPLOST money that goes out to the airport. Of course, we've got our little grant like y'all are fussing about. It's a little small, but it's very helpful. We can't complain. In fact, we're so happy with Carol that we are going to erect a statue and set it out there. I'll let y'all know when we unveil it. But Carol's been her staff has been extremely good to us, and we appreciate it. And but we are growing. Our industry is demanding it. So if you can, keep the money coming and look after us little guys too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bain. Great story. I know Dominic Larica and I talked about you, and I met you earlier this year, and what a passion you have for Hazelhurst as mayor and working so hard. And that's what we wanted to hear from, was folks like you, and that have a different airport than maybe this one or others. Yeah, you might have to give it. They can't hear it. Would you please?
But having soloed out there, and then I've got in my logbook 300 or 400 hours in it. I've been inactive for a good while, getting too old to fly. But I've got a love for that thing. I've seen it grow. I've used it. I've seen its need. And so you fellas do all that you can. And when Carol retires in a few months, I got to find somebody else to replace her because I'm not through.
We look forward to seeing the statue for you, Carol. That'll be great. But thank you very much. Next, we have Jonathan Pennell with Gray, Pennell, and Woodward.
Well, good afternoon. I need to talk to the schedule about how I got behind the mayor. I think he stole a lot of the thunder out of the room. But my name is John Pennell. I'm a lawyer in Savannah, and I'm here today really to kind of wear two hats and promote both commercial aviation, but also general aviation and just the funding needs all around our state. I am currently the chairman of the Savannah Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport in Savannah is the lifeblood of Savannah, much like our port. Not only does it support Gulfstream and about 10,000 jobs there, it supports our military, and it's also the commercial airlift for this part of our state. Y'all already heard testimony about the Brunswick Airport, the Gulfstream presence here, but it is vital for Savannah, and especially vital for our tourism industry. And that is our biggest economic driver in Savannah outside of Gulfstream, is bringing in those tourists in our community that fill up our hotels and also spend their dollars in Southeast Georgia. Also, I'm a frequent flyer. I'm actually a part of an airplane group based out of Savannah that is small business owners that fly all around the state and really the Southeast. And I got into that 4 or 5 years ago. Really, it makes my life easier. But I've realized now, being a part of it, how important that is, not only for my business, but for other small business owners and for economic development opportunities around the state. My law practice is primarily municipal bond work. And so we work with local governments, school districts, development authorities around the state. And I know, especially in working with a lot of those development authorities, I actually represent the Savannah Economic Development Authority in Chatham County. Having that airport, having that airlift, being able to bring in prospects, being able to promote Chatham County, being able to promote other places where I work with other smaller development authorities around the state, having that airport is how they can bring in prospects, how they can promote their communities and hopefully bring in new business. And so my message to you today is I just want to make sure this committee looks at both the commercial but also the general aviation. I know in talking with Greg Kelly in Savannah, I don't think the Savannah Airport receives really any state funding. They receive very few federal dollars. And so everything that happens in Savannah, they've got to come up with the financing needs to do that. And so whatever this committee can do with the state budget process, whether that's matching funds, leveraging more federal dollars, whatever it can be, I encourage y'all to please make this a priority and help all around our state, both in the general aviation and in the commercial aviation fields. Happy to answer any questions.
John, I don't have a question, but I do want to compliment you. As it was, I was in Savannah Sunday and Monday before I came down here, and the American Association of Airport Executives had their meeting there, and it was kind of interesting for me to get to meet people from all over the nation that are coming into Savannah. So you do a good job of marketing Savannah and bringing them in. And I did see some out-of-state cars. I wasn't sure how they were flying in there, but.
No, Visit Savannah, our CBD, falls underneath the Savannah Area Chamber of Commerce, and they've got a really great relationship with the airport. And we've been fortunate to bring in some new carriers over the last few years and really have grown immensely. And so, we've been very fortunate with our airport.
Yeah, I just one question, and you may not know this, but the commercial aviation there, Savannah, the airport keeps growing, and it's, I think you got 12 gates now. Do you have any idea off the top of your head the utilization of that gate space?
I think it's pretty well utilized. I know I've had conversations with Greg about needing an expansion of that terminal facility, and it was obviously designed to continue to expand it. And so I think that is, pre-COVID, that was being talked about. Now that the airlift has come back in the last several months, I assume that probably is on the horizon for an expansion of the terminal.
And have you heard of any other major airlines, Frontier,
I know we are
Allegiant?
always courting them. The newest was Southwest that just started flying out of Savannah in the last several months. I actually flew to Southwest up to Nashville over the weekend for the UGA game. So, having more of those carriers coming through has made a big difference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Next up, Jay Neely
Good afternoon.
with Gulfstream.
So I'm Jay Neely, the Vice President, Law Public Affairs at Gulfstream. Before I jump into my presentation, I'll answer the last question. My understanding from Greg Kelly, recent conversation, his airline passenger travel rates are now above where they were in 2019 pre-COVID. So he's exceeded pre-COVID, and he is running out of gates. So he needs that investment. So
Are they getting in your way?
Not at all.
Right, because you guys are over on the west side, right, if I remember, the airport.
I like to tell Greg we have him completely surrounded. We're literally on every east, west, north, and south of his terminal.
Okay, all right.
So I come to this conversation in a little bit of a unique way because I'm coming to it from three different perspectives. One, I work for Gulfstream, and I'll talk more about Gulfstream in a minute. Two, I serve and have served for many years as the chairman of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. And three, I'm a pilot myself. I'm an airline transport pilot with flight instructor, instrument flight instructor, multi-engine flight instructor. My first attempt at a career was flying airplanes. And as a point of personal privilege, and it's a small world, 30 years ago today, when I was much skinnier and had less gray hair, I worked in this very hangar as a young pilot starting his corporate pilot career. So working with Larry and others, this is old home week for me, for sure. So apologies for that personal point of privilege, but a lot of memories of this building, I can tell you. So airplanes and aviation, or airports in particular, from an economic standpoint, I see two key categories. One, businesses that operate on the airport and generate tax revenues and payroll and the like. So airports are a place where business happens, and that airports also are the conduit for business off the airport property. And those are two, in the state of Georgia especially, both of those are critically important. And with respect to Gulfstream, if I can make this microphone behave, with respect to Gulfstream, we've been in Savannah since 1967. I opened our doors on September 2nd, started with 100 employees. Today in Savannah, we're about 16,000 employees. We have six models of airplane that we build, ranging from the G280, which I hesitate to call the starter airplane, but I will anyway, about a $24 million airplane, up to the G700. G700 is about a $75 million airplane that Larry and I could get in the airplane in Shanghai, fly nonstop, and land right here at the St. Simons Airport. We'd rather have that in CAS, but we could do it without it. So Savannah has been our worldwide headquarters since 1967. As I mentioned, with 16,000 employees, worldwide, we've become a bit of a big company. We've got about 10,000 in Georgia, all but about 300 of those are in Savannah. The other 300 are here in Brunswick over at the other airport. Significantly in Georgia, our payroll is over $1 billion. So that's a lot of economic impact just with the payroll, not to mention the supply chain and the like. The growth story, just quickly, we were about 5,000 employees, give or take, January 1st of 2006. And since then, we've really exploded in Savannah in particular. And just to put some numbers around it, just in Savannah, since 2006, we've invested about $1.4 billion. And then we probably added 5,000 or 6,000 jobs in that time frame. And we've invested here in Brunswick, here in Glenn County, another $30 to $40 million. We started here in Glenn County in 1992 and had some significant expansions over the last few years in particular, and now have a state-of-the-art facility here, or at the other airport, I should say. And the reason that we've expanded in other places too, but anywhere near on the scale that we've done, particularly in Savannah. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is we have an excellent relationship with the airport and the city that effectively does operate the airport. We have an excellent relationship, but out of that relationship has come the airport's understanding that they needed to invest in infrastructure to enable us to do what we've done. So without that investment in infrastructure, we would not have been able to invest that $1.4 billion in Savannah. We would have done it at other airports. And Greg Kelly, who runs the Savannah Airport, was very focused on making sure that John and I both spoke here and made his plea that he really is short of funds, particularly when you compare that to his real competitors that are in other states. The other thing that's worth pointing out as it relates to the Savannah Airport is it's a multifaceted airport aviation environment. And here's what I mean by that. You've got, of course, a lot of commercial traffic there now and growing, as John just talked about. Two, significant cargo presence, and Greg is building a new cargo facility that will make it actually one of the largest, in terms of capacity, one of the largest cargo capacity airports in the Southeast, which has huge implications when you combine obviously the port along with the air cargo side. That has huge implications for the local community. And then general aviation, Gulfstream, whether it's true big business aircraft or smaller airplanes, and of course the military side as well with the combat readiness program. The key takeaway to Gulfstream's presence and what we've been able to do, focusing on that first point I made, that airports can be a place for business to grow and thrive. That infrastructure investment has made the difference in Savannah and Brunswick, and because the Glenn County team has done the same thing. That investment is needed going forward. There's a tremendous amount of space at both airports, just to use them as an example for future on-airport growth. And then last but not least, to wrap up, really picking up on the same point that John Pinnell made just a minute ago, and that is the role of an airport as a business connection to support aviation off airport. The work I've done with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, plus frankly the work I've done economic development related at Gulfstream, and my personal background growing up flying airplanes and being an active pilot myself, that a community, whether it's a rural community or a more urban community, a community without an effective and well-supported airport is at a tremendous disadvantage when it comes to economic development. Our surrounding states, the states we compete with, frankly spend a lot more money on their airports than we do. And so I think there's some opportunity. We're the number one state in which to do business, and for good reason, but this is an opportunity for improvement. Happy to entertain any questions.
The top of the line Gulfstream
jet that you're making today? Is that a
So the G700 is our newest flagship. It's still in FAA certification test flights. It'll certify at the end of next year.
That's right.
The current production G650ER is the one that I could put you in.
So if I have a pilot that's going to fly me into an airport with the G650,
Mhm.
what's the insurable length of runway we'd want to land on? But I know you can do a lot of things, but if you were going in and out of an airport, what's the shortest runway that you could say, hey, I could do this and be safe with my insurance folks?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a longer answer to a short question, but the punchline is most insurance carriers want to see a 5,000-foot runway. The airplane itself can operate out of 4,000 feet, but I think the real answer to your question would be 5,000. There are some operators that do get insurance for a lower amount, or should be a lesser length runway. Sometimes it's on a per runway basis that, hey, we go in and out of XYZ airport. We want an exception for that one, not in general. But 5,000 feet is the magic number.
And I know at our last meeting, I'm not sure, but I might have misquoting or misheard, but we were trying to move a lot of airport runways to 5,500 feet.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to understand the relationship of what's critical about that extra 500 feet on the runway when I think about, okay, you obviously build the Cadillac of airplanes here. So for me, what would an extra 500 feet get me in Gulfstream world?
So the length of runway is dependent on a number of things, but to keep it simple, is dependent on the takeoff weight of the airplane. So the heavier the airplane, the more runway you need. The more fuel you put on board, the heavier you are. So the constraint on the length of the airport constrains how far you can go nonstop. So the G650, just to use an example, the G650ER to take off at full weight with full fuel to go from here to Shanghai nonstop needs 6,000 feet.
6,000. Thank you.
Right.
That's what I needed to know.
Yep.
There's other really weird requirements too, based on the certificate holder of the airplane. So not every airplane certificate holder has the same requirements. Like for us, we have to do balanced field for American Airlines, and so it's where we could take off at 3,800 feet. We're requiring 6,000 for their certificate the FAA requires, and so a lot of it is just government math.
Yeah, well, that's actually a very important point. So in the general aviation world, you have two basic sets of regulations that you fly under. When I'm flying myself or a private company flying, it's Part 91. That's just, I'm flying myself or my own company, and the regulations are strict, but not nearly as strict as they are for charter operations, which is Part 135. So if you have an airport with a shorter runway length, because the Part 135 requirements require an extra safety margin, frankly, over what the airplane is capable of, and I think it's 50%, I think you have to add 50% to the takeoff length. An airport with the shorter runway, although the airplane is capable of taking off, it's restricted to or limited access for the charter operators, which for the community is a big deal because businesses often use charter airplanes to come in and out.
Thank you very much.
We have learned a lot there. Thank you for what Gulfstream does.
Happy to do it, and in case
For
anybody's
Georgia,
wondering,
and you're a great community partner and a great business partner in our state.
we're happy to do it. We do volume
Appreciate it.
discounts, and we have a great layaway program.
Yeah.
$1 down, I'll get you the started today.
Ms. Hope is up next. And we're not being rude that we have some of our members have a phone call they've got to be on for a moment, but I'll fill them in.
Not a problem. First, I'd like to kind of reintroduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm the airport manager at Atlanta Regional Airport, Falcon Field, and Peachtree City. I have a professional aviation degree from Louisiana Tech University. I'm a private pilot. I worked at the New Orleans Airport, Chicago, and Atlanta for American Airlines. I worked for Hartsfield for a few years. LaGrange Callaway for 5 years, and I've been at Falcon Field for 10 years now. I was on our local CVB board for 5 years. I'm an accredited airport executive with AAAE. I'm a past president of GAA and a founding member of AGA, which is the Association of Georgia General Aviation Airports. Now, some of the things I'm going to say are repetitive to what you've heard today, and that's because a lot of us have the same issues. But I just want to go back to Carol's presentation at our last meeting. And as you saw in her presentation, the state's really not providing enough funds to keep up with regular maintenance, much less assist with economic development. So to keep up with current projects, the state funding level would need to be well over $50 million. And although $50 million would be a nice hit, in order to cover state airports' long-term needs, it need to be more like $100 million, and that's just to keep up. I understand that we're competing for the same funds as the education system, pensions, public safety, corrections, Medicaid, and other transportation projects, and that the ask would be very painful if we got what we needed. But our surrounding states, as you've heard, are funding at levels much more than that, including Florida and South Carolina. There are some things that we could do short term that would help us out, and some of it Rob brought up in his presentation. One is the state match, the 75-25. Coming up with 25% of those projects is very difficult for some of these smaller airports. If the state could consider coming up to the federal funding match of 90-10, that would be very, very useful. Also, if the state could contribute to professional services. So there are certain services that aren't eligible for state funding, and if we had designs that we could pay for with state funds, it would get us ahead of the curve as well. Also, land acquisition. Right now, state funds aren't eligible for land acquisitions. That is a major stumbling block when it comes to both airport expansion and obstruction removal. The city of Griffin, with the relocation of that airport, they have footed that entire bill until the end of the project. So that's a major, huge hit for a community to fund until those funds come back. And then the state doesn't participate. Pavement conditions. Robert showed you a very interesting slide with the different colors. And that is something that is an issue throughout the state. The state does a pavement condition report every so many years. And it would be good if there were a state project that were similar to the project that brought the runways up to 5,000 or 5,500 feet. If we could have a state project to improve the pavement conditions at airports to bring them up to a 75 PCI pavement condition index. That would be certainly worthy at looking at. So yeah, if the state could consider crack sealing, seal coating, and marking projects, that would be a huge help to us as well. Fencing, that's another thing. Somebody mentioned fencing at the airport, deer problems. I've had a number of wildlife strikes at my airport. General aviation airports are not required to be fenced. So not necessarily for safety, I mean security, but for safety against wildlife. Since we have so many rural airports in our state, fencing would be a huge help as well. And the major thing that I think is also been echoed here is economic development. We can't use state funds for economic development. For example, I received a call from a nationwide real estate company last week involved in site selection for a 100,000 square foot hangar for aviation manufacturing. I have no land that has been developed that's ready to build. Everything that has been developed at my airport is built out, so the infrastructure is not there. So that's an economic issue that we have companies that want to build at our airports, but we're so far behind on the safety projects that economic development is just non-existent. Also, shortage of hangar space. That's come up a couple of times too. That is a definite problem. At my airport, we have over 100 people on our waiting list for T hangars and about 50 on our list for shared community hangar space. And I meet quarterly with the Georgia airport managers for the other airports around Atlanta, the Atlanta metro area. It's the same thing. And even the smaller airports that surround me, we meet every so often. It's the same story. We all have huge waiting lists, but we can't, it's not if you build it, they'll come. They're already here. We need to build it. So I'm trying to keep it short because I know it's been kind of a long afternoon for everybody, but if you have any questions.
Just one hope, and I would probably dig myself into a hole here real quick. You know, I think I've heard everybody talk about hangars and hangar acquisition and building them, and they're there, people lease them. I guess mine is, what's the barrier? I mean, if the state's not going to pay for them or haven't in this current world, I mean, it seems like private equity or private business people would be a great opportunity for them to invest in them, probably great repayment with the demand that's out there. I mean,
yeah, and I've heard good stories and bad stories about private-public partnerships. There are good and bad. But even if it's private funding, if they're coming into an airport that was purchased with federal funds, they have to meet all the same requirements. So an environmental assessment, which will take a good year and a half if you're lucky. Then the infrastructure has to be brought in, and then the building goes up. So you're talking at least 2 years from the minute somebody says, okay, let's go, till a building's going up.
Well, since we'll be together for the next 2 or 3 days, if any others have comments, I'd love to hear, what the barriers are out there, just because that's what I've heard.
I have one I'd like to mention to you. I've built a lot of buildings through the years, and I like to brag about the quality of my building. I want to be proud of it when I get through with it. Two of my corporations, talking about private money going in, we could land lease and let them build their own building, but they've got to build it by certain restrictions that are imposed upon us. And one reason I don't have corporate aircraft hangars there is they say they can build the building so much cheaper if they didn't have to follow these guidelines. Now, I don't like that because I want quality as well. But at the same time, when they get that's a problem that everybody needs to look into. They can build the hangar and get it priced and put up cheaper than we can do it through the regulations that's on us. And I'm for regulations where they need to be put, but that's something you need to look at.
And I will mention, we have over 40 ground leases at my airport. So we own the land, they pay for the building, and then they pay us a ground lease on that building. That's not the problem. The problem is getting the land underneath it developed. That's what takes so long. Getting your utilities in there, getting the grading done, the environmental assessment, sewer, water, all of that takes a lot of time. And that's the part that there's no participation on, either at the state or federal level.
Thank you, Hope.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Next, we have Mitch Ellerby at Thomaston, Upson County.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me this afternoon. I am from Thomaston, Georgia. Thomaston is a 200-year-old cotton mill town. And for those of you who are not familiar with our story, we've been asked to talk about it a little bit because we're kind of a success story for general aviation airports in Georgia. The KOPN that you see there is our identifier from anywhere in the world for a GPS to get you to Thomaston. The K, of course, designates the United States. The OPN was selected because it was the first airport opened in the state of Georgia in over 20 years when it opened in 1994. Now, to give you an idea of where we are compared with some of the other states surrounding us, how many airports have been built since from the ground up? One? Paulding County, Dallas. That's all we've had in 20 years, and now we're working on Griffin. So if there is any way, we need to try to accelerate that plan to renovate or replace these airports, Could I have the next slide? This is why. This was where we were in 1988. We had 2,900 feet of runway, and for those of you who fly, we had a circling NDB approach, which basically meant if it had any clouds anywhere, you weren't getting into Thomaston that day. You had to go to Macon. Now, at the end of the presentation here, we'll talk a little bit about economic development. One of the key points of showing this slide is during this time as a cotton mill town, we had over 5,000 jobs in our city between two major industries, Thomaston Mills and B.F. Goodrich, where they ran 24/7. 5,000 jobs in an entire county that had less than 25,000 people. So to say we worked for the mills was pretty much everybody. Right. Now, the development of our new airport here was an amazing thing to me, because during that time period from 1988 to 1994, when we opened this facility, the textile jobs went from 5,000 down to about 350. So that devastated our community. And we were fortunate enough through the development of this airport, I shouldn't say fortunate, it was foresight on the part of our community leaders to build this thing. We were fortunate enough to have the airport in place in the middle 1990s to help us overcome the devastation of textiles moving offshore. The facility has a full ILS is 6,350 feet long. We've got 96 based aircraft where the old airport had 12. And all of that has brought with it aviation trade work. We have an avionics shop. Go ahead, next. We have 2 AMPIA operations doing maintenance, and we have an FAA repair station. Okay, you can stop it right there for a minute. This is kind of a snapshot of how we got there. We spent about $8 million in the initial purchase and development. These are 1994 dollars, so it's a little different from today. Then the next phase was sort of rounding it out, getting us to our overall length of 6,350 feet. 2002 to 10, phase 3 began our maintenance of the existing facility. And then we've gone back and forth. We go from development to maintenance, And you can see that our GDOT shares have been significant, and they go along with that development and maintenance. It goes up and down. Speaking of the GDOT portion of it, I am a big fan of us being a block grant state. And not everybody in this room is, but if you're in a small airport, having a guy who is looking after you and 9 or 10 other airports is huge. Because Lou Walker looks after me. He works for aviation programs, and he lives 15 miles away in Barnesville, and he does a great job for us and the surrounding airports. And you got the same kind of system in South Georgia. You got the same kind of system in East Georgia, where you've got local people looking after your needs. So I like the block grant program. However, there are some issues with the block grant program for all of us. I asked my engineer, who is a dear friend of mine, Joe Mays, who's a legend in aviation industry. I said, Joe, do you like block grant or not? And he said, I don't. And I said, why? He said, you can't have a change order. So if there's one issue we can address, we need to have, like Hope said, the ability to use the grant funding, state grant funding for the planning purposes. We need to be able to go back and make changes when they're necessary after the fact, a supplemental agreement or that kind of thing. And we also, in a perfect world, we would see a faster turnaround on the reimbursements, because that's the biggest difference for me as a general aviation airport between being a block grant state and not being a block grant state. Is I'm looking at 30 plus days for reimbursement, where when we were dealing direct with the FAA, I was looking at 3 days. So those are parts of the things that we see. Next slide, please. On the economic side, this plant, when it opened, as we were opening the new airport, became the largest employer in the county overnight. So it was huge that we had developed this airport. We got Quad Graphics in here. They literally built because the airport was next to them. And the next one. This is Dark Container. They did the same thing. They built because the airport was next to them. These are two huge industries that got us started. This is Raynu Manufacturing. Lester Raynu is an entrepreneur who does powder coating on John Deere and Caterpillar parts. And he's quite an individual. When our chairman of our county commissioner sat down with him at lunch and asked him, why should I choose Upson County? Our chairman looked him dead in the eye and said, because when your John Deere customers come in to land, they're going to be looking at your facility. That was one of the deciding factors in having him move there. In the next one. And this is United Teleport. It's a Miami-based company that moved up here because of all the hurricane season stuff they have in Miami. What they do is they provide TV satellite coverage for Latin and South American countries. Now, as one of the interesting things about them to me was probably the second or third time Ricardo flew in, he was shaking his head as he's getting off his cell phone. He said, you have no idea what quality of life you have here. And it's something that we in small communities take for granted. He said, my daughter was coming with me this morning, but she woke up with a stomachache. So her mother's taking her to the pediatrician in Miami. I just got off the phone with them. As I'm landing here, they're just getting to the pediatrician's office. I got a 4-minute commute from my house to my airport, and that's the way it is for a lot of people in our community. That is a quality of life that we need to take advantage of when we're advertising our small communities. We've got a terminal facility, one of the first in the state. It looks like every other one now, but we designed ours in 1994 when they were planning on us working out the corner of a hangar in a little bitty office. And a local philanthropic group stepped up and said, we'll build you a terminal building. And that's been huge for us as well. Oh, I don't know how that got in there. No, I do, actually. That's my granddaughter. And she's in charge of security. No, actually, I'm having dinner with her tonight, so that's to remind me I got a dinner date. And that's the last slide. I'd like to answer any questions any of you have.
Mitch, that's a great story. A lot of planning went on a number of years ago.
It was. Thank you.
You know, but thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it. Tim Obitz from the National Air Transportation Association. Been sitting on the front row very attentively, haven't you?
Been smiling. It's
Yes,
been
you
good
have.
to hear. So I'm sadly from Washington, D.C., and a recovering attorney and a former lobbyist, and lobby now, so whatever I say you can disregard, basically. So National Air Transportation Association, 83-year-old association. We represent the fixed base operators, the Part 135, which is different from Part 91, so the air taxi guys, the fractionals, so everybody you see when you watch golf, everybody's got a logo there, those guys, and then the guys that fix the repair stations. Obviously, aviation, passionate people. You're seeing that from Mitch and others and the good mayor. They live and breathe this. And what's interesting about what's happening in aviation, and you heard from Gulfstream, is that people like larger aircraft. And what does that mean? That means infrastructure. So quite frankly, some of the air like here, the G650 can't fly out of here fully tankered because of the regulation and quite frankly the weight. And so a lot of the airport infrastructure out there, the runways or the ramps can only handle 75,000 pounds of weight. And so there is a much need for infrastructure to accommodate that. And why is that important? Because businesses and influencers fly on bigger aircraft and they won't bother with Georgia if they can go to Florida to go to those airports. And that's why it's critical that you all consider the infrastructure package at general aviation airports. You've got it down here with your 139 airports, the eight airports you have, but you've got 95 general aviation airports that desperately need your help. There's a big difference. They can't do a project when they get $100,000 worth of EIP funding per year, and they can't stack that money. And so they need help from you all. I mean, that's the one getaway. You ask about hangars. Why is it so difficult to build hangars? Here's the trick with hangars. You have capital investment that comes in. So Larry, he builds a hangar, costs him $10 million out of his own pocket. He's personally responsible for it. He owns absolutely nothing. Why? Because he builds a hangar, it belongs to the airport, and now he needs to get his capital investment back. So he's got to now negotiate a lease for 30 or 50 years to get that back. And then you have the local municipalities. For some reason, a lot of people decide they want to buy a house next to an airport because it's cheap. But then they complain about the noise and the pollution, and then they show up at the commission meetings. And so they think that when Larry goes and he wants to, well, it's different here, maybe in a different community, because anyway, they understand the value of business aviation in St. Simon Island. But in other towns, they don't understand that. And so they basically try to block it. And the local elected officials, it becomes a hotbed. And then you have the whole utility infrastructure as well. Who's going to pay for it? The irony of it is if they build it, they will come. It is true. And the biggest irony of it is that in Georgia, you have a personal property tax. And people are short-sighted because if they build that hangar and they get the jets in there and stuff, that's money that's going to the community. And they don't understand that message. And that is a critical thing that you have here. Now, probably most of the people in the room would want you to get rid of the personal property tax, but that's another issue altogether. What's happened with COVID is that business and general aviation has been able to redefine itself. We're in an unusual situation because communities now understand that business and general aviation isn't just a bunch of rich people flying around or people like Senator Harper who like to cruise around in his Piston aircraft on the weekend and stuff like that and do loop-de-loops, whatever it is, but it's critical missions. So you got cargo out there, you got agriculture, you've got jobs that are being supported that we heard about from Mitch and from the good mayor. You've got emergency services. You've got doctors that are being flown around. You've got the COVID vaccine being flown around to rural America. Mind you that, well, it's different here because you're so concentrated in Atlanta, Savannah, but in the rest of the country, only commercial aviation only serves 51% of the population. In Georgia, it's a massive state. You only have 8 commercial airports out there, but it's being served critically by what? By general aviation airports. So I'm begging you, on behalf of my 3,900 member companies that come in and fly here, please invest in general aviation airports. Thank you.
They liked your message.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Some of them are my members, so that's good.
Here. Good deal. Well, thank you. But last we have Travis Valen. Right, Travis? From J'Aviation.
Yep. Good afternoon. I'll be brief, not because it's been a long day. My wife is running around the island looking for a house, so this could be bad. First of all, my name's Travis Valine. They've talked a little bit about perspective. My perspective is for 20 years, I was the state aeronautics director in Colorado, so dealt with statewide funding and statewide funding sources, much like we're talking today. But for the last 12 years, I've been able to go all over the country working with states to identify opportunities for them to improve their statewide transportation system. And what I can tell you is every state plays some role in funding aviation in their state, but very few of them, and the few that do fund critical airport infrastructure, stand out. and their systems stand out. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned in my 30 years of state aviation and the last 12 of going around the country. 2 weeks ago, we were in Colorado Springs where most of the state directors from all over the country were for a conference. A gentleman by the name of Mike Arned, who's with Site Selector magazine out of Atlanta, was one of the guest speakers. He identified the top 10 characteristics that companies identify in locating to a remote location or a new location. Number 1 is workforce development. Number 3 was critical infrastructure, including airports. Now, I always thought the number 1 would be tax incentives. That was actually number 9. So what he's identifying to states all over the country is that critical infrastructure, such as airports, play a bigger role than people have ever used before. I can say from personal experience that, you know, the funding that we had in Colorado, which started in 1992 at about $6 million and grew to over $30 million by the time I left in 2010, those dollars generate additional dollars. And what I mean by that is that I can't count the number of times that the FAA would call at the end of the year with discretionary dollars and say, if we were to grant Telluride $30 million in the next 5 days, can you help support the match? So by having dollars available to put infrastructure in place, I am convinced that we generated additional dollars coming to our states. Now, you've heard that North Carolina, you've heard about Florida, but I'd also like to give you another perspective, a perspective of Wyoming. Not a lot of folks in Wyoming, not a lot of airports in Wyoming. Yet, the Wyoming legislature funds the state of Wyoming at $10 million a year because of the importance that Wyoming and transportation plays to a remote state. Now, if you were to kind of analyze the dollars that they spend per capita, it would be, to Georgia, it would be more like $70 million. So the importance that plays to them is critical. One of the things that always got my legislators' attention was what were our competitors doing from across state lines. We were always able to, every year we would have a committee somewhat like this to report our findings and what we were doing in terms of our funding. I would say that today, critical infrastructure in airports is more critical than it was 5 years ago and even 10 years ago. So I'm going to leave you with an analogy. You know, I talked about that every state plays a role. When I grew up, I played 6-man football in junior high. When I went to high school, we added 2 and we played 8-man. When I went to college, we played 11-man, and everybody on the field was either an all-state selection or an all-district selection. In 1992, I was fortunate enough to play for the Cincinnati Bengals. At that point, there were still 11 men on the field, but everybody was an All-American. And to play at that level is the equivalent of having states that invest in airports as a critical infrastructure. So if there was one thing that I could encourage this committee is to think of airports not as infrastructure, but as critical infrastructure, and the dividends that it pays back to the citizens and to the state will be multiple fold, as many states have identified from around the country. If I were to make a recommendation, I think it would be interesting to listen to those states that look at airport infrastructure as critical, whether that be North Carolina, whether that be Florida, or even Wyoming, to understand their perspective on how airports play a critical point in their infrastructure and their transportation. So with that, I'd like to get back to my wife and see if I'm a new homeowner or if we're looking at putting in an offer, but would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think, is Scott still here from Sea Island? He wants to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Oh, thank you. I just do really have a question for both you and Tim. You know, because you make a good point of those other states that fund more aggressively. I guess that's the way I'm going to put it, than the others. You know, Tim, you know, can you show, I mean, can you give this committee at some point in the future, you know, other states in a range maybe of what they fund and what they do? I mean, I think both of y'all know this answer or can provide us with that just so we can see, because, you know, we have, you know, we're along in the ride here too, making the case of what's going on. And I would be curious about what you see in the others. Go ahead, Rob.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, yes, we have spoken with those competing states, North Carolina and Florida, and they're very much interested because they understand aviation is a connection around the world. So they're not really competing. Airports don't really compete from that standpoint. They want our airports to be as vibrant as their airports. So they are willing to come to our next hearing. So we expect to have presentations from both those states explaining how they did it and what the benefits they've got from that program.
Sure.
We'll get you the data as well.
That's what a good executive director does, right? No, but we appreciate that, and just to make sure our knowledge is deeper and better
Absolutely.
about what else is going on. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
I know Rick's going to wrap us up, but for me, I want to especially thank one of our members, Larry, for having us here today. This is a great facility. I'm just kind of curious, do you say that plane up above your head, is it landed or is it landing? I'm not sure which one it is, but it's always interesting for me to see what you see hanging around in the hangar. Yes. But I look forward to being with the folks of the Georgia Airport Association for your conference down here. It's been a great opportunity for me to get to learn a little bit more about the airport side of the world. I'm not a pilot. I did want to let you know, said one of the exciting things for me is my daughter's working for Honda, designing airplanes in Greensboro. And believe it or not, said I got to see one of them up in Athens at the Athens airport the other day that kind of flew in. So
a Honda airplane.
A Honda airplane. Butch Miller was about to wet his pants.
As he should be, but you know, when you put together, I know Frank and we talked about this earlier. We're way down here on the coast. It's a long drive for many of our members, and we appreciate the investment they make, but more importantly, the investment you make. And I hope you take our comments seriously, that if you have things that you want to tell us privately, please let us know. I'm a note maker, Frank's always going, what the heck is Rick writing?
I think he's doodling.
No, but I make all sorts of notes and questions I have, but I think you as members would probably look back at what's been said today real quickly, that what Hope said was a list of things you wanted. I mean, you can, I think, some shaking heads, and she hit right down to the very nitty-gritty of what's out there that you wish that would be available for the growth of all the different airports. And I appreciate you, Hope, being so direct and very clear about it. Valerie, did you have? Oh, you're just moving your iPad. Okay,
Yeah,
I thought you were moving the
iPad.
microphone. But if there's anything else, we're done, and we'd like to adjourn this meeting. But more importantly, Abby Day, and Ben, we got to thank you too. Give them a hand. Yeah. Ben Line right there with the pretty yellow tie on, and Abby are our staff folks that make this happen. Chairman Ginn and I run from thing to thing, but they make it happen. Ben, especially in this meeting, I really appreciate what you've done, and the Senate folks filming and documenting this. We sure appreciate it. But that's it. Thank you very much. We adjourn.